St Kilda won the pre-season cup in 1996, their first trophy of any sort for 30 years. When they won it, their fans went mad, all but tearing Waverley Park apart. Saints fans didn't care that the competition essentially meant nothing to most other fan bases. It mattered to them. One man watching at home, though, thought it was all a joke. A team that hadn't made finals in 4 years, who had missed the 1996 finals entirely, were running around like they were world champions. He swore that if he was in charge of a team like that, they wouldn't make fools of themselves. And behold, 8 years later. When Grant Thomas won the pre-season cup in 2004, he clearly had better things to do. He looks like a man who's got a dentist appointment in an hour and knows he needs a root canal. When Lyon won it in 2008, he couldn't contain the excitement. Look at him. Like a golden retriever when its owner gets home, if that golden retriever was Old Yeller. I can understand why they both look like winning a trophy is the least important thing they had on that day. The NAB Cup was not particularly revered as a competition. No one ever used full-strength squads and some barely turned up. It's been dead now for a decade, and aside from a weird dalliance with a terrible rule set, it hasn't really been missed. But it was a good sign to win one. Most winners since 1988, with the extreme exception of mid-2000s Carlton for some bizarre reason, go on to be finals contenders. For St Kilda in particular, their cup wins seem to mark important phases of their existence. In 1958, it heralded the beginning of the end for the Invisible Men phase. In 1996, it was the catalyst for a team that had been nothing but pure crap since Lockett left to gear up for an unlikely premiership campaign. In 2004, it signalled that their rebuild was successful and was the green light for a finals tilt. And in 2008, it was the totem that ushered in their greatest period of success, in a manner of speaking. The Saints had secretly built a Death Star and were about to unleash it on the competition. But first, 2008 had to happen. Now, 2008 was by no means a bad year. The Saints had done great draft and trade dealings, Nick Riewoldt gained the captaincy outright, and he was a superb leader. Fraser Gehrig made the weirdest, second weirdest comeback of the decade. Jason Graham somewhat bizarrely won the Michael Tuck medal, and after a spluttering start caused Lyon to drop Dal Santo and Milne to wake the team up, they sat fifth with one game left. St Kilda, a team who'd had one 50-point win all season, needed to win by about 100 points to pass Adelaide for fourth. Of course, this being St Kilda, they did, leaving Adelaide to get this done to them. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely, the Crows were robbed. Right in front of me.
They got hammered by Geelong, then used superior accuracy to beat Collingwood. They, along with the Bulldogs, made preliminary finals. A lot of neutrals, including myself, wanted to see them both win so that the teams with two of the three longest premiership droughts could play off. Of course, they didn't. Geelong and Hawthorn were by some way the superior teams of the year, and won through easily. And for Robert Harvey, that was all that he could muster. Yeah, the hero of the 90s was still up and about, even managing 500 disposals in his 21st season. In fact, the 400 Club thought Harvey could carry on to join their ranks, but he retired before his time, and he wouldn't be the last Harvey we'd be saying that about. He had two more Brownlows than the 400 Club combined, but they all had a medal that Harvey only ever really had one real chance to get in his 386 matches. This idiot right here, with exactly 0 games under his belt after primary school, has the same amount of premiership medals as perhaps the greatest centre of all time. But that's what you get for being loyal to St Kilda. So it's another prelim heartbreak, but not only was the game never really close, but it was inconsequential compared to the 2 years that followed. No one really looked at that 2008 Saints side and genuinely thought they could go all the way, so the Saints made a change. New coaching hire Lee Tudor worked on a game plan with Lyon that encouraged a fierce forward press as well as a midfield zone defence which pushed an extra man, generally the ruckman, behind the ball. It got results, as they won their first game. And their next. And the next. And the next. And the next. Of those last 3 wins, they won 2 by 10 goals or more. Collingwood rolled up, who would finish 4th that year. Surely they would put an end to that streak. Except they didn't. They really didn't. St Kilda just beat a top team by 15 goals. No one else could touch them. It wasn't even their scoring that was the amazing part of their play. Their defense was insane. The 2009 Saints conceded less goals than 27 Saints seasons that all contained less games. Freo only posted 28 points on them, the Power only mustered 36, and Collingwood 40. It took 9 matches for a team to pass 80 against the Saints, and 12 matches to pass the league average score of 91. They conceded scores of 40 or less more often than scores over 70. That's nuts. Percentage-wise, 2009 would be the Saints' best ever season. This was St Kilda's best ever side, by a rampant margin. And let me talk you through them. You know Roo and Cossie, of course, both top 5 in contested marks in 2009, Roo leading all comers, Natch. Add in Stephen Milner, top 3 small forward in 2009, and you have 3 of the league's top 13 scorers in a team that had the league's best defense by far. That defense was led by Sam Fisher under the mentorship of Max Hudson. He, Jason Blake, and a young Zach Dawson were all top 20 in marks and top 15 in 1%ers. But the defense wasn't even the best part of this 2009 unit. It was the midfield. Oh, that midfield. 3 Saints got in the top 10 for disposals, the most of any club. But the more pressing stat is this. None of them were in the top 20 for hand passes. Much like Robert Harvey, they all did their best work by foot. Jason Graham ensured 4 Saints were in the top 10 for kicks, and while the Saints recorded the most clearances in the AFL, they were shared fairly evenly. But how could that be? Their ruck stocks were pretty average. The answer is tackles. Ross Lyon had come from a team that had blitzed every team in tackling, and his high-pressure mantra encouraged giving the opposition's best a big old bear hug whenever you could. The best tackling Swans team got about 1,400 tackles, pretty good for the time. 2009 St Kilda got 1,829, a figure only 3 teams have beaten in the tackle-crazy 2010s and 2020s. Montagna, Hayes, Jones, Ball, Schneider, McWalter and Ray all got triple-figure tackles, a quarter of all players in the league to get 100 tackles were Saints. This all meant, of a possible 132 Brownlow votes, St Kilda players took home 110, over 83% of available votes. You know how rare that is? In 50 years of 22-game seasons, 14 teams have hit 100 votes. 4 have hit 110. That's 2000 Essendon territory. You know, the team that started 20-0. And the Saints? Well, they went about trying to beat that record. They went 13-0 to start the season. This is super rare. There's a few teams, even today, in 2023, that haven't even passed 10 straight wins to start a year. And that makes it even more remarkable that their round 14 opponents also went 13-0. This match would surely be one of the best of all time, right? Fat chance. Within 17 minutes, the Saints had registered 5 goals through 5 different players. They'd been in command of every score, including Geelong's solitary point, a rush behind. Their control was absolute. Gary Ablett would eventually get Geelong's attack kick-started nearly 10 minutes later, but it's moot at the moment. When Andrew McWalter goals 9 minutes into the second quarter, the margin is just under 5 goals. And even when Michael Gardner kicks the first goal of the third term, the margin is still 4 goals. The Cats have been within 15 points for a total of about 10 minutes, 70 minutes into this game. To put that into perspective, the Bulldogs were within 15 points of Melbourne, or outright ahead, for 78 minutes of the 129-minute 2021 Grand Final, and they lost that game by 80 points. I guess what I'm trying to say is, despite St Kilda keeping the Cats at arm's length for over an hour, there's no such thing as a safe lead in the third quarter of a modern footy game. Much as Melbourne overwhelmed the Dogs with the demonic ritual, the Cats scored 3 quick goals to almost level the match. Nick Riewoldt got a crucial goal at the end of the third to pull some margin. Gardner and Kosicki combined again to extend the margin to 23, with about 15 minutes left in the final quarter. And then it happened again. 3 quick Cats goals clawed them back to within 5 points. Milne bought the Saints some breathing space before Dal Santo crucially missed a chance. The Cats took the kick in all the way to the house for 6 points, with Stokes finding the goal a couple of minutes later. Cue the most tense and dramatic last 5 minutes of a Saints-Geelong game ever, at least to this point. And cue a bit of an unlikely hero. Michael Gardner was a number 1 pick in 1996. Despite some injury niggles, he was a handy ruckman at West Coast before Dean Cox came and revolutionised the position. Moved to the forward line, he was an effective second foil to Quinton Lynch before he was bopped for talking to some crime family with, oh boy, him. He was on his last warning after those incidents, and a car crash cost him $5,000 and his job at West Coast. He was a sinner, and ironically enough, he was moved to the Saints. They rehabilitated his injuries and his psyche through 2008, and in 2009 he returned to being one of the very best ruckmen in the league. And before this game he wanted to make sure his opposite number, Shane Mumford, knew it. Gardner was beaten in the hit-out stakes, but he murdered Blake and Mumford around the ground. In Catholicism, for a saint to be canonised, 2 miracles must be obtained from God through their intercession posthumously. In a way, Gardner's career had already died, so, check. As for the miracles, well, let's count them, because Michael Gardner performed 3 miracles that night. The first was early in the game. A Cats defensive structure with 3 future Hall of Famers somehow fails to routinely knock the ball through for a behind. The Cats would never do anything like this again in the Thompson era. It sits up for Gardner as if through divine intervention. He scores. The second was through an opponent, handballing it into his teammate's foot next to the point post for an out of bounds on the full court unlike anything I've ever seen. Gardner finds himself free and scores again. And that would normally be enough to stuff into an envelope addressed to the Vatican, but Gardner has one more miracle in store. The game finds itself on a knife edge with a minute and change to play, but Luke Ball finds himself with more space than Julie Andrews on an Austrian hill and lobs one up to the hot spot. Nick Riewoldt, captain and hero, is the target. He whiffs, and the ball divinely falls into the hands of Michael Gardner. He plunges the dagger into the heart of Geelong and seals the deal. On his 30th birthday, St. Michael is reborn. It was a fine game, a great spectacle, even though Geelong never actually hit the front. It's safe to say that this is the best game ever played where the lead never actually changed hands. The Saints kept on winning from there with normal service resuming. Fisher, Graham, Dawson, Gilbert and Maguire threw a blanket over every offence they came across. Sydney gave them a scare, but they were only the second team to hit the AFL average against the Saints through 19 rounds of the 2009 season. They get to round 20. If they win, they tie the overall record for consecutive games won to start a season held by those 2000 Bombers, whose descendants take to the field to guard that record. The Saints? Well, they lost control and faced a 5-goal three-quarter time deficit. An inaccurate Andrew Lover and Brent Stanton kept the Saints in it as they scored the 5 goals they needed in theory, but Essendon's own scores left them 3 points up. Nick Riewoldt had a chance to make it 20-0, but he missed. God, I sure hope he doesn't miss again at a critical time. St Kilda lost by 2. Perfect season, gone. And next week's preventable loss to North didn't help matters either. St Kilda were 2 goals, 2 missed shots, away from an undefeated season. And even despite that, despite the fact that they just bettered their single season win record by 25% with 3 of the top 13 scorers in their team, it barely broke into their top 10 highest scoring seasons. That's how good that defense was, conceding over 2 goals less per game than any other team. Lyon caused a bit of a stir by resting some players for the match against Melbourne's criminal impersonation of a football team in the final round, in what would become a bit of a trademark move of his. The first real challenge was Collingwood. St Kilda used a 5-goal second term to overcome a lousy start, holding the Pies at bay. St Kilda's midfield worked to perfection and Riewoldt damn near outscored Collingwood by himself. The Saints jumped to their 4th preliminary final in 6 years, this time against the Bulldogs. The Suns of the West had pushed Geelong all the way in week 1 of the finals before shutting Brisbane down so hard that it took the Lions a decade to pop their heads up in September again. The Dogs got out of the gate early thanks to Liam Picken and Sean Higgins, but they were wasteful up front, only earning a 15-point lead against the goalless Saints at the first break. The Saints recovered in the second, but 2 Mitch Hahn goals kept the Bulldogs just out of reach. The third quarter was different. Despite both sides being under 50% in front of goal while sucking down their halftime oranges, neither side missed a shot in quarter 3. Riewoldt goaled practically as soon as the first centre bounce hit the turf, after hitting the turf himself, courtesy of Brian Lake performing amateur kidney surgery. Sam Fisher followed up with a rare goal to put the Saints up, and Riewoldt showed his class in the air, winning a 2-on-1 to extend the lead to 9. Raf Clark ceased his involvement in the game, which gave Griffin the space he needed to assist Brad Johnson. Gian Siracusa gave the lead back to the Bulldogs, but Milne jagged one 10 seconds before the siren to mark the final change. In the final quarter of finals, your icons need to stand up. Of the 4 Bulldogs to score in the first 15 minutes of the last term, the only one that hadn't played 150 games had won a Brownlow medal. However, 3 of them missed. At the other end, well, the forwards hadn't been firing. Milne and Rue were the only dedicated forwards who'd goaled. Riewoldt had played a good match, but if the Saints were to make a grand final, he had to make a bigger impact. And he did. He comes in from the side. He mucks, delighting the crowd, which includes a young Jack Higgins. Hiya, Snags.
My heart's pumping 1,000 minutes per second, so...
Riewoldt goals and gives his Saints the lead. The Dogs send it forward with about 3 minutes left. Dawson beats Gia to it and cleverly taps it to Gilbert's advantage. Gia gets the ball but just can't make the Saints pay. Phew! I sure hope no more bad bounces happen.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
90 seconds left. Ball hoisted up St Kilda forward line. Ball goes to ground in the goal square. Riewoldt gets a toe to it, and his 4th goal of St Kilda's 8 sends his side to the grand final. The next night, they found out who they were playing. Yep, the Saints, a team known for losing, with a bunch of cult heroes and weirdos that had just scored half the league average score the night before and were helmed by an alcoholic with only a single accident of a premiership to their name, had to go up against a burgeoning empire that had made the last 2 grand finals, winning one by 20 goals and having 30 scoring shots in the other. The Cats had 2 Brownlow medalists, 2 future 500 club forwards and a backline with 2 future Hall of Famers. The Saints had Raf Clark. Jesus. The game started in the only way it could for St Kilda. Raf Clark was run down by a homeless man who bombed the opener from 50, and Cam Mooney, shooting just above a coin flip all season, drives another long one home. Goddard steadies the ship soon after, but then Nick Riewoldt rocks the boat by rocking the MCG turf. Amazingly, he stays on the ground, but Joel Selwood extends the lead as a result. Merely a minute later, Jimmy Bartell fends Dos Santo off high, leading to Hayes slotting one. And then, with no time left in the quarter, Adam Schneider gives St Kilda the lead. This sparked something. Even when Geelong did something great, St Kilda was there with the pressure to counter with a great moment of their own. The whole second quarter was a seesawing act that never saw the lead exceed 10 points. Class oozed from every player, and any error was strictly punished. And what better place to start talking about Zach Dawson? He came to Moorabbin recommended by St Kilda royalty, and if anyone can pick key back talent, it's Danny Frawley. He also came into the game with a season and a half of AFL experience. The kid got battered in the press and by the fans while at the Hawks, and hey, did I think he was any good? He was undersized, that's the main problem. I kinda identified with that, so I thought he was alright. He proved to be a good enough hire at the Saints, but had trouble shaking that early negative perception. What certainly wouldn't help a man with a figure like a starving child was a bout of food poisoning. Dawson was on a drip on the journey to the MCG and for the 24 hours before. Not the ideal lead-up. He lacked strength, but St Kilda lacked depth. He had to play it out. So here he sits, in the back pocket. The thing to do here is distribute the ball without giving it to a future 500 club forward. But, dear viewer, that wasn't the end of the story. Let's see the other angle of that. Congratulations, the redemption meter has been activated. You have begun the correction of 143 years of altered history. The fates will take it from here. Forget Tom Lynch. Forget Josh Jenkins. This is the original goalpost controversy. And to add insult to injury, instead of a Saints kick-in, the resulting ball up leads to a Geelong goal. If the Saints lose by under 2 goals, this video will circulate forever. Again, St Kilda score through Jones in red time, and then amazingly, Kazitsky soccers the ball off the ground with a couple seconds left to level the game. The commentary team thinks the ball had missed. So too did Darren Milburn. But really, he had no right to complain. Anyway, the Saints would go into the long break on equal terms. Incredible considering that... Hang on, what's this? Milburn argued his point that Cozzy kicked a point, and that resulted in a free kick for dissent. Adam Schneider gets a goal after the siren, and amazingly the Saints had the lead. They'd kicked 3 goals in the last timed minute. Only one other club's ever done that in the grand final. So, St Kilda led by a goal. Except they didn't. They had 9 shots to 5 in that term and only extended their margin by 4, being extremely lucky to do so. St Kilda had been above average all year in front of goal, and Geelong's accuracy against was the highest in the league. And yet, 2 of their best forwards, 1 of their best midfielders, and some other bloke all missed chances. Hope that won't come back to haunt them. Geelong missed early chances in the third, but then this happened. St Kilda's best tall defender was out for crucial minutes after a dose of friendly fire. Not long after, Mooney marks some goals. So, where the hell did Nick Riewoldt go? Nick? Nick? God, I haven't seen him for like half an hour. Oh, there he is. He goals, which pleases the Hulk. No, not that one. Not that one. Not that one. There you go. He gets another chance, but Harry Taylor flings himself at Riewoldt's Oh, what was that? Well, I'm sure it's nothing. Paul Chapman scores a snap man, and with 90 seconds left, the scores are even again. Time for the Saints to score a late one to steal the lead at the break. Right on time. Hawkins opens proceedings in the last, and what follows is complete agony for both sides. Every dispute for possession looks like the Battle of the Somme. 12 minutes to go. Adam Schneider makes Geelong skipper Tom Harley look like a beached ocean liner. He drills one from just inside the 50, his 5th shot of the day. He jags it just wide, his 3rd behind. 11 minutes left. Schneider runs, pouncing on a loose ball. He's held an obvious free kick that isn't paid. 9.5 left. Clinton Jones wins another free kick, stopping a counter-attack. St Kilda hit on the burst, and another former Swan, Sean Dempster, has a go. He misses. Badly. 8 minutes left. Ball up, one of many in the congestion. Quicker than a flash as Bartel draws the attention of a stoic Saint defence, the ball falls to Chapman, who kicks it off the ground and misses. 7 minutes left. Milne picks up a rough bounce, squares it to St Kilda's all-time marks leader, and the ball goes to ground. 6 minutes to go. Mooney puts one down, a big scramble. Dawson fumbles it into Jones's foot, ricocheting off to Chapman. He wings a miracle handball to Max Rook, who lets one loose. Stephen Baker was a role player, like many in the Saints side. One of many great taggers who popped up in the 2000s, he was a reliable 200 gamer and a best and fairest winner. That being said, he could have played a lot more. He holds 2 records: the longest suspension from a single incident under the points-based tribunal system, and the longest suspension from acts in a single match under the same system. He got both those records in different matches. His style of play was uncompromising. His job, as he saw it, was to break the opposition, be that mentally or, oftentimes, physically. He'd broken Steve Johnson, holding him scoreless and to 9 touches. Now he had a great chance to break Geelong's psyche. Baker had 20 metres to cover on tired legs on a sodden ground. Against all the odds, he did it, punching the ball through for a lead saving behind, nearly killing himself doing so. Off the kick-in, Nick Rewalt goes for a glorious mark, but it jars loose. Of all the players to knock down in the pack, he knocks down Kaczynski. Taylor scoops up, and the ball finds Joel Selwood's hands. Selwood, even at 21, looks every bit the Hall of Famer he will undoubtedly become. This is the second season of a streak of 11 seasons of 13 Brownlow votes or more from him. The only knock on his game right now is his goal kicking. Pity that. 5 minutes left. Scores level. For the next 120 seconds, the ball bounces from end to end. Until this. Another chance. Geelong looks to go on the counter-attack. Johnson spies Abler wide open in the middle and goes for him. The kick loops up. A hospital pass. Zach Dawson leaves his man and charges over 20 metres and punches the thing out of Ablett's hands. The ball spills to the ground. Due to Dawson's run and Geelong sweeping up for a counter-attack, there's numerical mismatches everywhere. Both sides have superior numbers in their forward lines and only 2 men each around the ball. No one is within 20 metres of them. Whoever wins this ball will set up a score, likely a goal, in a game where scores are at a premium. A goal here could ice the match, so whoever wins this ball wins the grand final. Ablett falls to his feet. He has no chance, he's gone. Matthew Scarlett, following Kaczynski into the centre, is 10 metres from the ball. His opponent had over 5 metres on him. It's a Saints ball, and Dawson's basically right on top of the Sharon. At this moment, right here, the Saints win the 2009 AFL Grand Final. So let's check on where Dawson and Kaczynski are right now. Dawson had done everything right. He'd got to the ball without taking the man and put it to Kaczynski's advantage. He'd done everything right to about this point. Of all the places to go, of all the 19,608 square metres of MCG to run to, he picked the one where Justin Kaczynski went. They collide, slowing them both to a dead stop. Cozzy throws him off and away from the ball, and away from the fast-charging future Hall of Fame fullback Matthew Scarlett. Cozzy gets close, but he doesn't get close enough. Scarlett toe pokes it to Ablett, who turns and bombs it forwards. The best defense of the year, and possibly of all time, failed to win 2 contests where they had a numerical advantage, and an open Paul Chapman snaps past the outstretched, desperate dive of Jason Blake to claim his 3rd goal. Game over. It was rough enough for the already maligned and ill Dawson that Chapman was the man he'd left to make the play in the middle of the MCG. But to be involved in the 2 most talked about moments of the game and lose both encounters despite technically winning them, that was nearly too much for him to handle. Rook scored a behind soon after, which kinda sealed it. Milne launches one into the 50, hoping to find Schneider, but the kick bounces the wrong way. Oh, I think I just had another premonition. I need an aspirin. Milburn kicks the ball out. One more chance for the Saints to turn it over. Montagna stays down. His man, Harry Taylor, doesn't. They send it down the field. The homeless man gets it and ends things as he started them. Geelong wins one of the great grand finals by 12 points, at least 11 more than they should have had if this gets called correctly. And if that swing happens, and Max Rook is kicking this after the siren for the win, does he cope with the pressure? I don't think he does. I think he misses, and St Kilda win one of the great matches. This call was the difference. But so were these shots, so was that moment. It was kind of fitting though. You can't spell Saints without stains, and St Kilda really shit the bed on this one. It was fitting for another reason too. St Kilda's first ever success was way back in the South Yarra days. We've touched on this a couple of times. The goal that gave the Yarra men their first and only title was completely illegitimate and called wrong. The Seasiders got lucky with another call, and then there was the Saints' bizarre triumph in the intermission years, and Aussie Jones's point that allowed Troy Schwartz to have his moment. It was only fair, then, that the Fates would repay the Saints for the sins of their ancestors, and it was only appropriate that the team to benefit was the team that beat South Yarra for the first Challenge Cup way back in 1863. It's not an unfair, unjust call. It's an act of penance, a righting of 143 years of wrong history. It's redemption. But hey, there's always next year, right? Right? Well, not for Andrew Lovett. St Kilda traded their first pick for the speedy Essendon star. Of course, this being St Kilda, he lasted 3 months before being sacked after being accused of R-wording after previously verbally abusing police. He was later acquitted, but St Kilda had lost both its first rounder and a superstar forward. Still, there was one positive for St Kilda. Much like Buckley and Judd before him, Lovett's very, very brief roommate Jason Graham was the leading vote-getter for the Norm Smith medal in a losing side. All 5 judges voted him in their top 3, and the man who'd only cracked the Lions premiership squad for 20 minutes over 2 years, one of the most underrated players in the league, had a prize he'd cherish forever. Excuse me, Paul, excuse me, that belongs to Mr. Graham, sir. Paul. Paul Chapman also got 9 votes, and despite only polling from 3 judges, won the medal on a countback. A technicality. I mean, here's where I get a little soapbox, but the AFL had multiple Norm Smith medals ready to go, and if we can have multiple Brownlow winners, we can have multiple Normies. Give Graham his medal, for God's sake. I know he's got a Michael Tuck medal, but Jesus, even cash converters don't take those plastic trinkets. Anyway, let's calm down. We've got a good lineup. There's always next year. There's always... Oh my God, what is it now? Attention everyone, Judas alert! Judas alert! We have a Judas alert! This is not a drill! Luke Ball requested a trade, specifically to Collingwood. He moves from a lovable loser with no rivals to a powerhouse that all other 15 hate, that looks the other way when stars drunkenly take out Stobie Poles. Luke Ball moved from the Saints to the Sinners, and a lot of folks weren't too happy. It was all born of a rift between Ball and Lyon, and as a Crows fan, I've seen this movie before. Lyon sends a message by dropping a player or making one guy the villain. In our case, it was a 31-year-old that was probably past his prime. In this case, it was the guy that St Kilda drafted ahead of Chris freaking Judd. In that grand final, Ball had a massive stat line, which becomes insane when you realise that Lyon benched him for almost the entire second half. Yeah, man, a fresh midfielder would have been really fucking useful, wouldn't it? Collingwood had already traded all their picks away, and pick 30 was the only carrot they really had to dangle. St Kilda refused and lost a 25-year-old second pick midfielder for nothing. Pick 30, in a very deep draft which could have brought these names to Moorabbin, was used on Luke Ball. It took only 3 weeks of the 2010 season to renew acquaintances. In a match that threatened to be close at the half, Collingwood failed to score a goal with 9 scoring shots, resulting in this atrocity of a final scoreboard. A good sign, but the 2010 Saints season was inconsistent. A thrilling win over the Dogs was followed by a thrashing at the hands of Carlton. A run of wins ended with an 8-goal loss to those Pies. A tough draw against the Hawks was backed up by a miserable loss to 12th placed Essendon, and then a spanking of a not entirely dreadful yet Port Adelaide. Their regular season ended with a sad defeat to one of the worst Adelaide sides I've ever seen. And looky here, it's their new rival facing off with them in week 1. This time it was the Cats getting off to a hot start before the Saints displayed an absolute masterclass in inaccuracy, scoring 5 behinds in as many minutes. Riewoldt notched a quick couple to snag a 9-point lead at the first break from 4 more scoring shots. And then Stephen Milne arrived. Small forwards typically have their best seasons in their mid to late 20s before tailing off as their pace dips away. Milne had his highest scoring seasons at 25 and 28. Perfect. So you'd expect to see a big drop from here. Yeah, he'll keep going down. Maybe here he'll drop. Or here. Or here. Milne's 56-goal 2012 came in his age 32 season, at a time when that age was almost grounds for automatic retirement. His consistency was remarkable, and his accuracy even more so. It's in the nature of being a small forward to be less accurate than a key forward, as a high percentage of shots are snapshots or on the run or from angles in the pockets. Not Milne. He figures in the same postcodes as some of these big key forwards. His 2005 haul of 61 goals came at 75%. That's Matthew Lloyd territory, and it wasn't even his best showing. His 2010 was a welcome return to form. Barring his bizarre 5 goals 5 against Richmond, he went at nearly 68% accuracy and was the leading small forward in the league. He wasn't overly fast, but had an agility and a goal nous that he was more than ready to unleash against those damn Cats. He scored 3 goals in 5 and a bit minutes between some Cam Mooney pot shots, with goals from the midfield brigade either side of half-time threatening to kill the game off. Then, the Cats woke up. Jimmy Bartell became an unstoppable juggernaut, and Geelong worked their way back into it. Riewoldt hits the behind post from 48. Rough. Rougher still, Geelong essentially take it the length of the ground, and Mooney gets another... Poor fucking Zach Dawson. Who on earth wins 2 contests against the same team but has the behinds they force called as goals instead both times? Zach Dawson. That's it. Hawkins makes a fool of himself trying a Joe the Goose, but Johnson mops up seconds later. Then Geelong go coast to coast again after a Nick Riewoldt out on the full shot. Again. Shannon Burns, oh gee, there's a name I haven't thought of in 10 years, scores a goal. Riewoldt replies and makes amends almost instantly. Stokes wheels around and pins the margin back to 17, with Johnson closing the quarter by reducing the lead to under 2 goals. It's safe to say that Geelong had the momentum in the final term. St Kilda only had 1 shot on goal, a Schneider 6-pointer. Let's see how Geelong went. Mooney behind from range, a rushed behind, Ling poster off a tough shot, a bad miss by Matt Stokes, and a missed Mackie long bomb before Paul Chapman finally ends the run of misses with a nice conversion. It seemed a matter of time before the Cats could land that killing blow. Varco snaps on goal with 4.5 left, but misses. 5 points in it. Joel Selwood pings a torp with 3 on the clock. Props for the ballsy decision, but it's wayward. St Kilda take it forward but can't produce. With 70 seconds left, Geelong punts it up the ground. Goddard rushes to intercept, but it bounces over his head. It spills to ground. James Wilt picks it up, but Mooney wraps him up. He tries to get a handball out to Goddard, but can only find Cameron Ling. Ling shapes up to kick the winning goal, and it bounces through. St Kilda, the team that had just lost to an 11th placed Adelaide, will have to trek through September the hard way. Sorry, what's happening? Karma's a stingy bitch, isn't it? Sometimes in football the wrong call will be made, only to be balanced out later. Gwilt gets a free kick for a push in the back which probably wasn't there, and after a brief Geelong argument, the game is over. Good thing too, because it would have been really unfortunate if St Kilda had failed to win because of an odd bounce of the footy.
Foreshadowing.
The Bulldogs won a barn burner over Sydney, and so they would meet the Saints in a preliminary final again. So, of the teams with the 3 longest premiership droughts, one would at least have a guaranteed chance of breaking it. And at the start, it looked like the Bulldogs wanted to be the ones to do it. St Kilda, especially our man St Nick, kicked for goal like toddlers, while Microphone Head did this. But the Bulldogs let the Saints off the hook with a few misses of their own as half-time came along, with a running, lumbering goal by Big Boy McAvoy, making the margin only 6 points at the main break. The concept of the Premiership quarter has been in footy for a while. The idea that a fast start after half-time is critical to success. According to White Box Analytics and the Saints of 1913 and 1971, it's a myth. According to the Saints of 1965, 66 and 1997, it very bloody wasn't, but the 2010 Saints, well, they must have believed in it. It began, as it did a year earlier, with a goal within the first minute of the third term stemming from a Brian Harris and/or Lake free kick against. Rewalt gold 3 minutes after that. Cozzy gold 3 minutes after that. And Brett Peake, that's who you replace Luke Ball with. Okay. Well, anyway, he scores 3 minutes after Cozzy. Lindsay Gilby replied, but a quick double salvo from Schneider and Rewalt killed the resistance, with Gardner scoring another a couple minutes later to complete a devastating 37-point turnaround. The margin got as bad as 45, which allowed the Saints to put their feet up while their fans cleared their plans for next Saturday. So, who would they face in that 2010 Grand Final? In a game that was over about 30 seconds after quarter time ended, Collingwood had won their way through to the Grand Final. 44 years and 1 day after the 1966 triumph, a Saints side that had lost the prior Grand Final and a Magpies side that finished as minor premiers would again fight to decide the title. It was fitting. This was the tour of reruns. First, this tiny piece of redemption marking them as the team of the future. Then the repeat fixture against the Bulldogs marking the Saints as the team of the present. And now, the revenge matchup to see if the 2010 Saints could hold a candle to the heroes of the past. This was a different Collingwood to the one that Barry Breen clumsily put the sword to. The 1966 loss signalled the start of the Collywobbles, a curse that saw the Pies lose 7 of their next 8 grand finals. They'd crumbled so far as to claim 2 wooden spoons, and were only 5 years removed from coming half a win away from a third. Unbelievably, the team that used to be a nationwide powerhouse had won less flags since 1960 than Adelaide and West Coast, who hadn't existed for half that time. Still, they'd lost more grand finals in the last 50 years than St Kilda had ever made, and they just missed out on being the first side since 2000 Essendon to surpass 72 premiership points on their way to top spot. They had facilities that, even though they were nearing a decade in age, were state-of-the-art. They had altitude simulation chambers, while St Kilda were training in a gym with 2 toilets. Not 2 whole bathrooms, mind. 2 toilets. Collingwood's lineup, though probably not as legendary as Geelong's, still contained a midfield full of future Hall of Famers and Brownlow winners, as well as the dangerous Alan Didak up front. Their defence, like St Kilda's, was stingy and quick, led by the alright player but fantastic leader in Nick Maxwell. And they didn't waste any time showing how potent they were. Much like they would do in 2011, Collingwood scored instantly. Stephen Milne registered a reply for the Saints, but then Collingwood's small forwards hit hard with 3 goals in 6 minutes. The Saints midfield regained ascendancy though, and Riewoldt and Schneider managed to stem the tide. The Pies' lead was reduced from 20 to 6 at quarter time, with Lenny Hayes gathering 10 touches in that first stanza alone. But then Collingwood hit again with another battering ram. They had 10 more clearances and 16 more inside 50s in the second term alone. But aside from an early Cloak goal, they struggled to score. Most of their 10 shots came from long range, and 2 of their 3 goals came from free kicks. Travis Cloak had chances to bury the game then and there, but missed 2 of the easiest chances, the spirit of Ray Gabelich coming back to haunt the Pies, or maybe that's just Travis Cloak being shit. But the Saints only registered 2 shots on goal, both from outside the arc, for a solitary goal. The margin at the half was 4 goals. Advantage Collingwood. Before the AFL came over All-American with its entertainment schedule, the Grand Final sprint was a fixture of half-time. There, the fastest players in the AFL who were available, and in one weird year a couple of taxi drivers, assembled to see who was quickest over 100 metres. Of course, St Kilda and the Magpies had their best 22 on the field, so they each chucked in a player from their reserves. In 2009, St Kilda fielded Rhys Stanley, a massive ruckman with surprising pace, who surged to win. The Saints must have hoped this would lift the crowd and propel them to victory. It didn't. So it was hardly a great omen when, a year later, St Kilda's Luke Miles somehow beat Lewis Jetta. Listen to that roar. Surely this lifts St Kilda up now. There were encouraging signs for the Saints, and Ross Lyon could see that. Collingwood had been fortunate with some of their finishes. I mean, a Mung Torp from 55 indeed. They'd become complacent. All it would take was one act to swing momentum after a long half-time break. Enter Lenny Hayes. Lenny was the first piece of the puzzle for the rebuilding Saints, taken all the way back in 1998. He instantly became known for his toughness, and I mean instantly. In his first match, he was ironed out by Glenn Archer, a lump of metal in a blue and white singlet. Hayes, famously, bounced straight back up. He showed his love for tackling in 2000, ranking 3rd at the Saints despite not really playing midfield minutes. He finally got to the centre in 2002 and came 5th in the league. In 03, he was 4th, and in 2004, he led all comers, as well as being top 20 in clearances, inside 50s and goal assists. His 2006 was his best work yet, until doing an ACL in round 9. It was part and parcel of the Saints' experience though. It seemed a rite of passage that their best players would miss a full season at some point. His 2007 was basically a recovery session to prepare him for his final form. 2008 to 2010 Lenny Hayes was an insane beast. Per game you could expect 26 disposals, 5.5 clearances, 3.5 inside 50s and a phenomenal 6.5 tackles, all with a clanger rate of only 10.4%. And from 2008 to 2012, Hayes was polling Harold Bray level Brownlow votes, unfortunately having a similar amount of outright success as Harold. He was not only incredibly skilled and tough, but incredibly humble and beloved. Everyone loved Lenny, so much so that Lenny got self-conscious from all the attention. It was remarkable. Off the field, the guy was a teddy bear, but on it, that bear would rip the head off a swan. And in the first couple of minutes of that 2010 Grand Final's second half, he almost did. He'd already stopped the rot once this match with his 10 first-term touches, but this tackle on Dane Swan did more than win a free kick. It won momentum. He began to dominate that midfield. He sparked a change in the fabric of the match itself. After Nick Riewoldt goaled, every possession became harder to get. Tackle numbers increased. Andrew McQualter ended up with more tackles than touches. Goddard took a fine mark and closed the gap, and Sam Gilbert, who'd previously gone at a goal every 7 games, scored a great goal not long after. Players flung themselves around as a couple more behinds were registered, and St Kilda left the third quarter having gained 16 points on those Maggies. The first 12 minutes of the final term are painfully tense. Only 7 total points are scored, with the margin now 13 points in Collingwood's favour. Lenny Hayes wins the ball some 52 metres out. He goes back to take his shot, and his teammates do everything but laugh out loud. Now, Hayes is an elite player, being halfway through a 3-season span of polling no less than 19 Brownlow votes in each. If you want a tackle machine, he's your guy. He'll hold the all-time record for a short time. He's an in and under marvel. But as a goal scorer, even dead in front, he's unreliable. Even now, at his peak, he averages a goal every 3 weeks, and his last season at over 50% accuracy was 2 prime ministers ago. He's not tiny, but he's still a small guy. Even if this kick does somehow go straight, his teammates know he's not making the distance. But he's a big game player. Almost all his key stats take at least a 25% boost come September. He uses all of that and gets every last bit on this kick, and it goes the distance. Davey Milne jags his first goal since the very start of the game, and the Saints are only 1 point back. Then, it happens. Nick Riewoldt and Luke Ball collide like 2 bricks. The Saint wins the contest over the Sinner and squeezes a shot at goal away. It rolls along the perfectly manicured MCG turf, staying low. Then, on its last bounce, the point of the footy strikes the turf. The ball bounces 6,000 miles in the air. It gives the exact amount of time, to the microsecond, that Nick Maxwell needs to throw his body at the ball. And there it is, the nexus point. It's almost too poetic to be real. The 2 opposing captains and the bloke who'd worn both their jerseys over the last 12 months combining to level the scores. Surely no other moment from this grand final would be anywhere near this significant. For about 30 seconds. Yeah, St Kilda intercepts the kick out and Lenny Hayes feeds the ball into the forward line, finding a man who St Kilda never should have had. Exactly 100 years since St Kilda hired a Goddard that Carlton thought wasn't good enough for them. A Goddard that by rights should have played for Carlton, soars above the pack and takes one of the most famous marks of all time. This was the moment. Goddard's ensuing goal put the Saints in front for the first time, and yet the game felt over. Collingwood were out on their feet. Cloak had a chance, but missed again, typical Travers. The ball was moved again toward the St Kilda goal. Then Nick Maxwell snapped. It was the act of a man, a team with nothing to lose. He left his man, much as Dawson had done 364 days prior, and won a contest, but retained the ball. He made a mad dash from half-back, driving the ball forward. With new enthusiasm, the Pies build up methodically, and McCaffer puts one into the mixer. Shaw climbs high, but somehow Chris Dawes, sitting on his ass at the bottom of the pack, gets the reward. He handballs the Cloak, and even he couldn't miss from this distance. He puts Collingwood in front, and it was almost unjust. In 2010, Dawes and Cloak had limped to 70 goals combined. They'd run around today like drunkards and kicked like it. And yet they'd joined forces in giving the Pies a lead that they might well hold on to. Dawes backs up a minutes later but falls about 2 metres short of sealing the game. The Saints defenders decide to punch the ball to the boundary rather than through for a behind, keeping the margin at 1. Sidebottom has a shot. Gwilt saves the day. He unleashes a mammoth punt in hope. Nick Riewoldt takes a massive mark well away from his usual home in the forward line. He bombs it down the line where Lenny Hayes finds it. He dumps it into the Saints forward line. Stephen Milne, one of the greatest small forwards of all time, battles with Ben Johnson, a more than capable defender. The ball bounces on its point, spinning off at a stupid angle. Johnson is beaten and stumbles his way to the bar in Bay 13. Milne, though, keeps his footing and shapes up to collect the ball. This is it. He is about to right the wrongs of history for a team that's seen so much misery, heartbreak and irrelevance. Supporters of all 14 other clubs jump up, begging for Milne to finish off the hated Collingwood. This is as good as it gets. This is as good as it's ever going to get. What were the odds of it? 2 games, the same venue, the same end, for God's sake. Barry Breen and Lenny Hayes, both legends and both men who were desperately trying so hard not to score a behind. Both wobbling, both errantly bouncing punts at the same end of the same ground through the same damn side of the goal mouth with almost the exact time left in the game. There are 2 differences: the colour scheme and the scoreline. Was this revenge? Cosmic fate? Or is it that the Saints live in hell? The ball comes back into Saints territory one last time, but Collingwood manages to clear it. The siren goes, and the players sink to the floor, dismayed. The crowd doesn't know what to do. This will be the 3rd and last ever drawn grand final. Thanks to no one bothering to update the 100-year-old rulebooks, the 2010 decider was played under an archaic rule that states if a grand final, and only a grand final, was drawn, there would be no extra time. Instead, the match would be replayed a week later, same time, same channel. Lenny Hayes walked away with the only Norm Smith medal to ever be awarded in a drawn match. Afterwards, the players were publicly critical of the replay rule, and this match was instrumental in eliminating the grand final replay some years later. But that wouldn't help these teams now. The Saints and the Pies had to meet 7 days later. In 1958, Moorabbin had blown a 28-point quarter-time lead to draw the VFA Grand Final, having led the whole match bar the last 30 seconds. In what was the only VFA Grand Final replay, Williamstown had 15 scoring shots to 0 in the first term and blitzed Moorabbin. And in 2010, the team that called the same ground home had to come back the next week and try again. It began much as it did in 58. Collingwood started hot with 6 of the first 7 inside 50s. They registered 2 quick goals and were unlucky not to be up by more. Then, St Kilda had a counter-attack. The ball comes over the top to Nick Riewoldt, leader, captain, best player for the Saints for the last 5 years, and a future Hall of Famer. He takes the mark from a distance not too much greater than his own height. All he has to do is just go back and take the easiest set shot in the world. But he doesn't. He plays on and kicks. He kicks. Come on, man, just kick the ball. Kick it, get rid. Kick the... No. Heath Shaw closed down 10 metres before the St Kilda great could move one, sending the ball dribbling through for a harmless and humiliating behind. From the kick-in, Collingwood went coast to coast, with Brent McCaffer adding insult to injury. What could only have been an 8-point lead ballooned to 19 in the blink of an eye. Rewalt missed again before Sam Gilbert sprayed 3 behinds on the run in only 10 minutes in a dazzling display of the yips. When Brendan Goddard finally kicked true halfway through the second quarter, the Saints were 13 points down, having had 2 more scoring shots. They were still in it. But McCaffer and Jolly scored quick consecutive goals, which would have been alright if Adam Schneider's shots, within seconds of both sides of the halftime bell, went through the middle. They didn't, leaving the Saints 26 points down in the single most inaccurate grand final half of the AFL era. Some might think it unlucky, but the Saints live in hell. They never recovered. Collingwood piled on 20 points over the first 10 minutes of the third term to begin the coronation. For a saint to be canonised, 2 miracles must be obtained from God through their intercession. The first miracle manifested through the football itself, bouncing as if it was running away from Stephen Milne specifically, taunting both him and a fan base that had waited 45 years for this moment. These are no unlucky bounces. This was the act of a higher power. This ball did exactly what it needed to do, no more no less, to torment this man and this team for eternity. The second manifested through Heath Shaw, a man who could have easily been delisted for his off-field antics, who somehow found a turn of pace to make up 10 times the amount of ground his opponent was covering to make an iconic play. But who gets the credit? Well, I guess there was only one man ever really at home with the idea of even playing that second game, so we have to attribute all this to him. And it's fitting that on the day St Kilda's St Michael played his last ever full game, we anoint a new St Michael. Of course Michael Malthouse wanted to play that second game. It's a tale of revenge that was 34 years in the making. Alan Jeans at the end of the 76 season had sat down to tell Malthouse that due to the level of skill in the squad, the 50-game defender would be surplus to requirements at the Saints. He moved to Richmond, basically doubling his production overnight and winning a flag as St Kilda launched into the intermission years like that car from Neighbours. But it seemed he wanted to prove that he wasn't just good enough for St Kilda. He was better. As a player, he recorded his lowest loss percentage against the Saints. As a coach, he crushed them more than any side that wasn't an expansion team playing out of Carrara. And after the drawn grand final, he and Eddie Maguire made sure to have their post-game gala that night. Collingwood were able to draw from the draw in 1977, where North had banded together that night, which led to a unified performance that won them the replay. And what do you know, St Kilda decided to rest their battered Warriors on Saturday night. Mick gave a stirring speech at the gala, and so 7 days out from lifting that cup, St Mick had already ensured a Collingwood victory. And, thanks to one bounce and a rule that belonged in the 1940s, he managed to engineer the ultimate revenge. St Mick would always emerge victorious more than almost anyone. His method on this occasion, though, was pure malevolence. Let them think they had it won, and then smash their hopes with brutality and extreme ruthlessness. It had to be divine, saintly intervention. This wasn't mere happenstance. This wasn't accidental. This was more than fate. This, combined with everything else, all the heartbreak of the last 15 years, was exactly how all of this was supposed to happen. The Saints were losers. They were destined to be, engineered and trained to be. They knew it when they first formed. They knew it when they got kicked out of the VFA, and let's face it, it was the real reason why the VFL took them in. They knew it in the early years. They even knew it in 1913, 1965, 1971. They knew it during the Dark Ages, after Alan Jeans left. Boy, they knew it then. They knew it during the Thomas rebuild. They've always known it. With results like this, it's hard not to. The St Kilda Saints are losers by design. And now, everyone knows it. The players, the staff, the fans, they all understand what they have to be now. They can dream of being champions all they like, but it'll never happen. They were now about to jump from the best thing they'd ever been, straight into a malaise that would last the rest of the decade. They were about to become the St Kilda Football Club.